My name is Emily Carter. I was 17 when I told my mother I was in love, and she told me I was throwing my life away. That night, I left everything behind, including the home that stopped feeling like mine the moment she tried to erase my heart. What happens when a mother's love feels more like a trap than a shelter? Before we dive in, where are you watching this video from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love knowing where you're all tuning in from. And if you've ever had to choose between love and family expectations, this one might hit home. Let's get into it. You'd think a girl would remember the smell of cinnamon cookies and the hum of an old radiator with warmth. But for me, that kitchen, our little house in Shadyside, Pennsylvania, turned into a battlefield the moment I said one name: Michael. He was the boy I met behind the school gym, the one who fixed his dad's beat-up Ford after class and somehow made me laugh even on the worst days. Michael Hughes, the mechanic's son. The one my mother, Marlene Carter, called a phase, a distraction, and a mistake. She never said it with concern, only disdain. It happened the night before my college orientation. We were supposed to be packing. Instead, I was standing across from her in our kitchen, the yellow light flickering above the table like it couldn't decide whose side to be on. "I need to tell you something," I started. My voice was small, but my resolve was. "Michael and I were together." Her hand froze mid-reach for her teacup. Slowly, she set it down, porcelain against wood making a sound sharp enough to cut through the silence. She didn't yell right away. That was the worst part, how calm she sounded at first. "Together," she repeated, like she was testing the word on her tongue and already choking on it. I nodded. My hands were clenched under the table. "For over a year now." Marlene's lips curled into that tight smile she used when she was about to tear something down piece by piece. "That boy, the one who works under cars and smells like gasoline." She let out a dry laugh. "Emily, you are going to Carnegie Mellon. You have a future. You are not going to throw it away for someone like him." "Someone like him?" I repeated, my stomach churning. "He's kind, he listens, he believes in me. And he is beneath you." The words landed like punches. Something in me cracked. I looked at the woman who raised me, the woman who told me bedtime stories about strong women but couldn't stand the idea of me choosing my own path. I saw fear in her eyes, but not for me, for her reputation, her plans, her control slipping. "I'm not asking for your permission," I said, my voice shaking even as I stood up. Marlene rose too, towering despite her petite frame, her voice sharp. "You ungrateful little girl, after everything I've done." "I know exactly what you've done," I snapped, grabbing my bag. "You've planned every second of my life, every dress I wore, every club I joined, every friend you approved. And now you want to dictate who I love." She moved toward me, but I stepped back. "I'm going to Pittsburgh," I said. "And I'm going to love who I love, whether you like it or not." And then I walked out, not in a dramatic movie sort of way. My heart was racing. My eyes were full, but I didn't slam the door. I closed it behind me quietly, because loud goodbyes make it harder to come back. I stayed that night at a friend's before driving myself to campus the next morning. My acceptance letter, folded in my coat pocket, was my ticket to something bigger. But it didn't feel like freedom yet. Not with the echo of her words still ringing in my ears. Funny how a house can go from being a home to a museum of what you're not allowed to want. What would you have done if your own mother called your love beneath you? Would you have left too? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear how this story unfolds. Because this was only the beginning of what I had to fight for. They say the first night away from home is the hardest. But when home doesn't feel like a refuge anymore, it's more like slipping off shoes that never fit right. My dorm wasn't even ready when I got to Pittsburgh. I ended up staying in a month-to-month rental above a bakery on Ellsworth Avenue. The place smelled like cinnamon at sunrise and grease by dinner, and I loved it. It was nothing like the polished predictability of Marlene's house. The kitchen here had one working burner. My mattress was barely thicker than a yoga mat. But there was no one watching when I got home late, no one deciding if the boy I loved was worthy of a smile or a snide remark. Still, it was quiet, too quiet. Michael and I texted, mostly late at night, sometimes just one word, "Safe, here," thinking. Other nights, he'd call and we'd talk until the light crept through my blinds, both of us trying not to say what we were really feeling. That we missed each other. That we were scared. That maybe love wasn't enough when the world told you it shouldn't be. I threw myself into classes at Carnegie Mellon. Architecture wasn't easy, especially when you were one of only 3 girls in your studio group, and the professor kept calling you kiddo instead of your name. But I was good at it. Building things felt right. Solid. Unlike everything else that had cracked back home. To make rent, I picked up shifts at the campus library and cleaned houses on weekends. I learned how to make $5 stretch 3 meals, how to fake a smile when you're too tired to feel, and how to survive on caffeine and stubbornness. But sometimes, the loneliness snuck in anyway. It showed up in the grocery store when I passed a mother reminding her daughter to grab almond milk. In the echo of a voicemail I couldn't bring myself to delete, even though Marlene never left another one after that night. In the way Michael's voice cracked on the phone whenever we talked about the future in past tense. "I could be there in a heartbeat," he whispered once. I imagined it, him showing up with that crooked grin, smelling like engine oil and peppermint gum, just like high school. But I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. "Not yet," I said. "You've got your life too." He didn't argue. He never did. Maybe that was what hurt the most, how quietly we'd learned to wait to hope without promises. I remember one night the heat went out in the apartment. I wrapped myself in every blanket I owned and still couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk sketching lines that turned into rooftops, bridges, buildings too perfect to exist. I must have sent him 20 photos of half-finished designs that week. "This one," he texted back at 2 a.m., the one with the big open windows. "That's the one I'd want to live in." With you, he didn't write, but I felt it. I never told anyone at school about Michael, not because I was ashamed, but because it still felt fragile, like saying it out loud might jinx it. Like if Marlene's voice echoed in my ears long enough, I'd start believing her. But I didn't. I couldn't. He was my reminder that love didn't have to be pristine to be powerful. It just had to hold. And somehow, across the miles, through all the missed calls and aching silences, ours did. Have you ever loved someone in secret? Not because it was wrong, but because the world didn't want it to be right. 2 years. That's how long it took before I saw Michael in person again. I'd come home from a grueling shift at the library, my hair in a bun that had mostly given up, my sneakers soaked through from a surprise spring downpour. When I opened the door to my apartment, I thought I'd left the hallway light on. But it wasn't the light. It was him. Michael stood in the middle of my tiny kitchen, holding a brown paper bag from our favorite diner back in Shadyside. His jacket was damp at the shoulders, his hair a little longer, and his eyes hadn't changed at all. "You left your front window cracked," he said, smiling crookedly. I took it as an invitation. I dropped my bag. I think I said his name. I know I cried. He didn't ask for permission when he crossed the room and pulled me into his arms. I didn't need to pretend anymore. Later, after the tears and the laughter and 2 very cold burgers, he told me everything. He'd found a job in Pittsburgh, construction supervisor for a small firm. Nothing glamorous but steady, with benefits and weekend hours. He'd been applying for months without telling me, afraid he'd jinx it. "I didn't want to show up without a plan," he said, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "Didn't want you to think I came just to crash on your couch." I laughed because that's exactly what he ended up doing for the first 3 weeks. We rearranged my cramped space to fit 2 toothbrushes, 2 schedules, 2 lives. He brought his coffee mug shaped like a car engine, and I made space on my bookshelf for his half-read spy novels. We cooked simple dinners, mostly rice and vegetables, sometimes splurging on takeout. We took turns doing laundry at the corner laundromat, fighting over who got to fold the socks because that meant less time with the wet jeans. It was chaotic, imperfect, and it felt more like home than anything I'd known. A few months later, a small apartment opened up just above the bakery downstairs. It had a real bedroom and windows that let in the smell of fresh croissants every morning. The floors creaked, the cabinets stuck, and there was a weird humming noise in the walls that sounded like a distant cello. We loved it instantly. We painted the living room ourselves, soft gray, with one wall of bold navy blue that Michael said made him feel fancy. He installed floating shelves for my architectural models. I built a custom desk for him out of reclaimed wood we found in a yard sale. Some nights we stayed up planning imaginary homes, him sketching out the framing, me designing skylights and staircases that curled like vines. We dreamed out loud in that one-bedroom apartment as the smell of sugar and dough drifted up through the floorboards. We were still careful, still quiet. We didn't post photos. We didn't talk about hometowns. We both knew the shadow of Marlene still stretched long behind us, but it didn't reach here. Not in our little sanctuary of chipped plates and hand-me-down furniture. One rainy evening, we sat on the fire escape, sharing a blanket and passing a cup of coffee between us. The city lights shimmered off the wet pavement below. "I used to think love had to be loud," I whispered. "Like movies, like grand gestures and fights in the rain." Michael looked over, his hand squeezing mine gently. "This is louder," he said. "Every day we show up for each other, that's loud enough for me." I nodded, feeling something settle in my chest, something sturdy, something real. Have you ever found peace in the small, quiet things? A shared blanket, a homemade shelf, a cup of coffee at midnight. Those are the moments I learned to measure love by. And in that tiny apartment above a bakery with the rain tapping against our window, we began again. If you blinked, you'd miss the moment I became a wife. No white dress, no flower petals, no aisle lined with folding chairs and whispered gasps of finally. Just a Tuesday, windy, gray, quiet. We stood under flickering courthouse lights, waiting behind a couple who were arguing about whether they'd lock the car. Michael was in his work boots and button-up flannel. I was wearing a navy sweater I'd bought from a thrift shop with a tiny tear in the sleeve I always meant to fix. When they called our names, I looked at him and whispered, "You sure?" He nodded. "More sure than I've ever been." And that was that. The clerk was kind. She had lipstick on her teeth and called me honey when I fumbled over my vows. Michael's hands were calloused but steady as he slid the silver band onto my finger. My voice cracked when I said I do, and his eyes shimmered in a way I'd never seen before. We signed the papers in silence, our fingers brushing as we handed them back. No witnesses except a sleepy intern and a janitor humming off-key in the hallway. But it was perfect. It was ours. Afterward, we walked to the little cafe around the corner and shared a single cupcake with wax paper wrapped around the base. I still had icing on my lip when he pulled me close and whispered, "Emily Carter Hughes, my wife." I laughed, cheeks burning. "I still feel like that girl who ran out with a backpack and a broken heart," I told him. He took my hand and placed it over his chest. "Then let's build something stronger from here." We went home that night to our bakery-scented apartment, our keys jangling in rhythm, 2 rings glinting under the flickering hallway light. We didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Not because we were ashamed, but because joy this fragile, this hard one needed time to breathe without judgment clawing at the door. We fought too hard for this quiet, this peace, this promise made in low voices and tired eyes. I tucked our marriage license behind a row of design books on my shelf. He slid his ring off every morning before work, slipping it into his sock drawer like a secret tucked away for safekeeping. And every night, when the city finally settled and the walls went still, he'd press a kiss to my shoulder and whisper, "Still mine. Still yours," I'd whisper back. There's something revolutionary about joy in secret, about choosing love without applause, about not needing the world to clap for something only your heart truly understands. I used to dream of a wedding with music and lights and relatives crying into their napkins. But standing there in the courthouse, with Michael's hand wrapped around mine and my voice trembling over 2 words, I knew. I didn't need 1,000 eyes. I just needed one man, and the courage to choose him anyway. Have you ever kept something beautiful to yourself just for a while? Not out of shame, but because it felt too sacred to share? Tell me in the comments, and stay with me. Because even secret happiness has its shadows. It started with a voicemail from Marlene. "Emily, I'll be in Pittsburgh this weekend for the Women in Business luncheon. Thought I'd stop by and see your place. Friday evening. Hope that's not too much trouble." Not a question. Not even a let me know. Just a mother announcing her arrival like she was the queen and I was still 17, obligated to curtsy and clean. I stared at the screen, heart racing. Michael was in the next room, holding Henry's toy airplane and making it fly over the sofa. "Was that her?" he asked, already knowing. I nodded slowly. "She's coming Friday." He sat down next to me, quiet. We both knew what that meant. By noon the next day, I had a list scribbled on a sticky note that might as well have read, "Erase your life." Photos of the kids, packed. The framed one of Ava and Clara at the pumpkin patch, gone. The wedding ring dish. Into the drawer under old cables and expired coupons. Anything with our last name on it, preschool art, envelopes, even the dry cleaner receipts, stuffed into a tote bag I shoved in the trunk of our car. Michael stood at the bedroom door, watching me strip the apartment of every trace of him. "You don't have to do this," he said, voice low. "Yes, I do. She might not even notice. She always notices." I didn't mean it like an insult, but I saw the flicker in his eyes anyway. He offered to take the kids to his cousin's place for the weekend. I didn't argue. The thought of Marlene spotting a baby bottle in the sink or a crayon wedged in the couch sent my chest into tight spirals. The lie was heavy, but the truth felt impossible. Friday came too fast. I scrubbed the apartment until my knees ached. Rearranged the bookshelf to display only neutral titles, no parenting guides, no bedtime stories. Made tea. Lit a candle. Put on a soft, non-confrontational sweater. When Marlene knocked, I didn't recognize her right away. Her hair was shorter, dyed a cooler blonde. Her heels clicked on the hallway tiles like punctuation marks. "Emily," she said, stepping in with a brisk hug. "Smells like cinnamon." "The bakery downstairs," I replied, closing the door gently behind her. Her eyes scanned the space like she was flipping through a catalog she hadn't ordered. She didn't sit, just walked slowly through the room, pausing now and then, at the couch, the bookshelf, the window ledge. "No roommate?" she asked, fingers trailing the back of a chair. "No. You've made it cozy, small but livable." Translation, not up to her standards, but surprisingly tidy for someone she expected to fail. We sat with tea. She talked about the luncheon, about the women on the panel, and how none of them had children because they knew better than to ruin their careers. I sipped slowly, saying nothing. She mentioned Nicole, my younger sister, briefly, mostly to note how she was still wasting time with that boy from the auto shop, and how she hoped Nicole would eventually come to her senses. "Remind you of anyone," she said with a thin smile. I smiled back, empty, controlled. "I'm glad you came," I lied, hands trembling under the table. "It's been a while." She nodded. "You always were the independent one." Another pause. "You're sure you're not seeing anyone?" That was her way of digging, of checking. Her eyes didn't blink when she asked, just bored holes through my defenses. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "No." It wasn't anger I felt, it was something colder, something like fatigue laced with survival. "I just worry sometimes," she continued. "You're getting older, it's not easy out here on your own." "I manage." She looked around again, slower this time. "I suppose you do." We didn't hug when she left. Just a light hand on my shoulder, like I was a well-behaved student she was quietly proud of. After she walked out, I locked the door, then sat on the floor and cried. Not because I missed her, but because of everything I had to erase just to let her in. Michael texted a few hours later. "We're good. Kids miss you. Clara drew you a picture of a unicorn with a crown." I smiled through my tears. That night I lay in bed alone, staring at the empty wall where our photo used to hang. Have you ever had to pretend you were someone else, just to survive an encounter with someone who should have known your heart? It's exhausting. But sometimes silence feels safer than truth. Ava came into the world at 3:42 a.m. after 17 hours of labor, screaming like she was already arguing with the stars. Clara followed 90 seconds later, silent, squinting, and calm, like she'd been watching from the inside, taking notes. Twins. We hadn't planned for that. I remember staring at the ultrasound screen the first time we found out, clutching Michael's hand while the technician smiled like she was delivering news about a surprise party, not a second heartbeat. "2 of them," she said. "Congratulations." Michael blinked. "Like at the same time." I laughed and cried in the same breath. We barely had enough saved for one crib, one car seat, one name. And suddenly, there were 2 tiny girls on the way, demanding space in a world we hadn't even dared to fully claim as ours. But we figured it out. We found secondhand everything: strollers, bottles, onesies with little bears on the feet. Our apartment shrank overnight, corners filling with diaper boxes and white noise machines. Michael built the cribs himself. I painted their names on the wall with shaky hands and way too much heart. We kept the windows open all summer. The scent of bread and vanilla frosting from the bakery downstairs became the scent of their first months. Sometimes I wonder if that's why Ava still smiles when she smells cinnamon. A year later, Henry arrived, big eyes and loud lungs and a head full of dark hair just like Michael's. I joked that he waited a whole year just to make his entrance feel special. 3 kids under 2. We didn't sleep. We didn't go out. Our couch had more spit-up stains than cushions. But our home, it was alive. Every morning started with chaos, bottles warming, toddlers wailing, toy trains underfoot. And every night ended with soft songs in the dark, 2 parents whispering dreams they didn't dare speak in daylight. The world outside didn't know about us. Not really. But inside that little apartment, we were loud with life. Michael would come home smelling like sawdust, boots heavy, arms wide. The girls would squeal and run to him. Henry, too young to walk, would bounce in his bouncer like he'd been waiting all day for that moment. I watched it all from the kitchen, sometimes with tears I couldn't explain. Because I had this thing no one saw. This love. This wild, untamed, unapproved joy. On weekends, we'd pack up the car and drive out to the countryside. We'd stop by roadside stands for apples and pie. We'd spread out a blanket under trees and let the kids roll in the grass, chasing bugs and making crowns out of clover. I never posted pictures, not one. No birthdays on Facebook, no ultrasound reveals. No family portraits framed in the hallway, not because I was ashamed, because I was protective. We didn't exist in her world, Marlene's world. And that felt safer, quieter, ours. Sometimes I'd lie awake at night, one of the babies curled against my chest, and wonder how long we could keep it this way. How long the walls we built could hold. But then Clara would sigh in her sleep, or Henry would smile in that half-dreamy way, and I'd remind myself, this isn't hiding. This is peace. We weren't invisible, we were safe. Have you ever kept something sacred away from the world, not because it was shameful, but because it was yours? Because letting the wrong eyes see it might shatter the fragile miracle of it. That's what those years felt like. A secret garden behind locked gates, and inside it we bloomed. The 5th candle on Ava and Clara's birthday cake flickered as they leaned in to blow it out together, giggling through the anticipation. Michael stood behind them with a towel slung over his shoulder, icing on his cheek and a glow in his eyes I never got tired of seeing. Henry clapped wildly from his booster seat, face sticky with frosting. And I, camera in hand, smile plastered wide, froze for just a second, because the moment was perfect. And no one else knew it existed. No grandparents. No aunts. No birthday cards from anyone who shared our blood. Just the 4 of us, and the soft ache I carried every year as I invented excuses not to go home. 5 years. 5 years of skipped Thanksgivings and something came up texts. 5 years of smiling through holiday photos from Nicole, of pretending I was too busy to visit, too focused on work, too tired to travel. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was always tired. Always balancing motherhood, deadlines, grocery runs, bath time, story time, dinner, dishes, and those quiet moments where I stood alone in the hallway and questioned if I was doing the right thing. Keeping them hidden. Keeping me hidden. Because I never really stopped being the girl who walked out of Marlene's kitchen. I just learned to carry her quieter. Michael never pressured me, not once. But the question lingered sometimes, between sips of coffee or when he caught me staring too long at the untouched contact list on my phone. One night after we tucked the kids in and collapsed onto the couch, he said softly, "Don't you ever want them to know who you are, who we are?" I didn't answer right away. Because the answer was complicated. I did want that, but not if it meant opening the door to judgment, to pity, to control. "I want to tell them," I whispered eventually. "But I need to see they've changed, not a minute before." Michael nodded. "That's fair." And it was, because I wasn't the same girl anymore. I was stronger, but also scarred in places that still flinched at the sound of Marlene's voice in my memory. I'd seen what her expectations did to love, to freedom, to daughters who didn't follow her map. I wasn't about to hand her a second chance to redraw mine, so I kept us tucked away like a well-worn letter no one else could read. We celebrated Christmas with paper snowflakes taped to the windows. Easter meant backyard egg hunts and homemade bunny ears. For Halloween, we dressed up in whatever the thrift store had. One year, Henry went as a traffic cone, and it might have been his peak fashion moment. The girls started kindergarten, shy and curious. I used my lunch breaks to pack their snacks just right. Michael did the morning drop-offs before heading to job sites, often with paint smudged across his collar. I designed buildings by day and fairy castles out of cardboard by night. And still, the question pressed in from time to time. How long could we stay this invisible? We couldn't avoid the world forever. Not when Clara began asking why she didn't know Grandma, why Ava's classmate talked about family reunions, why we only ever sent birthday cards and never received them. I didn't have the answers ready. I told them some families looked different, that ours was full of love and magic and pancakes on Sundays. And that was enough for now. But I knew it wouldn't be forever. I knew time was coming for my silence. Still, I waited, because some truths need the right moment, the right tone, the right clarity, and because deep down I still feared what Marlene might take from me if she ever laid eyes on all that I'd built. Would she try to fix it? Would she tell me it wasn't enough? Would she see Michael and call him a mistake again, this time in front of our children? I couldn't risk that. Not until I saw that something had softened in her. Not until the grip of her disapproval loosened just enough for me to believe that love, real love, could survive under her gaze. Until then, I protected us the only way I knew how, by staying away, by staying quiet, by keeping the most beautiful parts of my life where no one could stain them with shame. Have you ever loved something so fiercely that you kept it hidden? Not because it was worthy, but because you were afraid the world would break it. That's what these years were. A fortress built not from fear, but from fierce, fragile love. I drove to Shadyside alone that Christmas, pretending the quiet was peaceful, pretending I hadn't cried 3 times before even hitting the highway. Michael packed my overnight bag like he always did, neatly, with little notes tucked between my sweaters and socks. "Call me when you get there," one said. Another was folded into my wallet. "Come home proud of who you are." I didn't bring gifts for everyone, just a few things for Nicole, her kids, and a small batch of shortbread cookies for Marlene, not because she liked them, but because I still hadn't unlearned the habit of trying. When I pulled up to the house, it was snowing softly, the kind that melts as soon as it lands. The porch light glowed golden through the flurries, casting long shadows I hadn't seen in years. Nicole answered the door before I could knock. "Look who finally decided to grace us with her presence," she said, grinning. I forced a smile. "Merry Christmas, Nikki." The living room looked exactly the same. Same gold-framed portraits. Same glass coffee table with its bowl of fake fruit. Same faint smell of furniture polish and lavender. Only the energy had shifted. Nicole's kids ran past me, wild with sugar and new toys. Someone was playing Christmas jazz too loudly in the kitchen. I set my gifts down near the tree and tried not to feel like a visitor in a place that once had my name on the mailbox. Marlene emerged from the kitchen like a politician working a room, composed, smiling, full of warm greetings for the cousins, the neighbors, the guests. She hugged me briefly. "Emily, you look tired." "It's been a long week," I replied, "but I'm glad to be here." She didn't ask if I came alone, didn't mention Michael, didn't say a word about the 5 years I'd been absent from Christmas dinners, though the silence pressed around us like another guest. Dinner was a polite affair, ham, green beans, potatoes whipped to perfection. Conversation stayed safe, work updates, real estate prices, a cousin's new boyfriend who apparently had potential. No one asked about me. I hadn't even made it to dessert when Nicole, 2 glasses of wine in, decided to break the script. "Okay," she announced to the room, laughing. "Can we just talk about the fact that Emily is 30 and still tragically single? I mean, come on, we need to get this woman on a dating app." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. The room chuckled. Lightly, uncomfortably, I managed a smile. "I'm actually very happy," Nicole snorted. "With what, your library books and houseplants?" Nicole, Marlene said sharply, not in defense, more as a cue to adjust the volume, not the message. Then she turned to me, all solemn and syrupy. She's just teasing, dear, but she's not wrong. It's time you started thinking about a family, Emily. You're not getting any younger. The words hit like ice water to the face. My throat closed, not because they were new, but because they were still being said. Still after all this time. As if my life had remained on pause, untouched, unloved. As if I hadn't built a family already. I'll think about it, I said quietly, setting down my fork. But inside, my chest burned with everything I couldn't say. Nicole laughed again and reached for another cookie. I'm serious, though. You're gonna regret wasting your prime years. I looked around the table, scanning the faces that once felt familiar. Everyone seemed more comfortable talking about me than to me. No one knew that just last week. Clara had asked if Santa could bring Grandma a hug. That Henry had learned how to spell mom with fridge magnets. That Ava had drawn a picture of our family with stars over our heads because we're magic. No one knew because I hadn't told them. And in that moment, I didn't feel guilty for keeping them out of my life. I felt angry that they believed I had no life at all. I took a sip of my cider and looked at Marlene across the table. It's good to see everyone, I said. Thanks for the meal. And then I excused myself to the bathroom before the tears could make an appearance. I locked the door, leaned against the sink, and stared at my reflection. What they saw was a woman alone at Christmas. But what I saw was someone who'd chosen peace over approval, authenticity over performance, and a life full of love, even if it wasn't served on Marlene's fine china. Have you ever been surrounded by people and still felt completely unseen? That's what this Christmas was. Not lonely, just invisible. I wasn't planning to do it. I hadn't brought the photo to prove anything, to pick a fight or make some grand statement. It was just there, in my purse, tucked between tissues and gum wrappers. A printed snapshot from last week that Michael had slipped in as I was packing, folded with a note on the back that read, "Whatever happens, I'm proud of you." In the photo, Ava and Clara were wearing their matching red pajamas, tangled up in wrapping paper and grins. Henry stood in front of the tree, proudly holding up the paper snowflake he'd made at preschool. Michael knelt beside them, holding the camera remote mid-laugh. It was one of those rare photos that somehow captured the heartbeat of our home. And suddenly, after the comments, after the snickers, after Marlene's not-so-subtle nudge about my so-called empty life, I wanted someone to see it, just once. I waited until the kitchen cleared. Nicole was stacking dishes by the sink, humming to herself as if she hadn't just tossed my dignity under the bus in front of 10 people. I reached into my purse, pulled out the photo, and set it on the counter beside her. She glanced down, laughed, then froze. "What's this?" she asked, her voice tighter than I expected. I didn't answer right away, I just let her look. She picked up the photo with both hands like it might bite her if she wasn't careful. Her eyes moved over the scene, over the twinkling lights, the couch cushions slightly askew, the joy so blatant it couldn't be staged. Then they landed on Michael, and stayed there, her jaw twitched. "Is that?" I nodded once. "Michael," Nicole looked up sharply. "You're still—" I never stopped. She didn't say anything. Just stood there, photo in hand, lips slightly parted like she was still searching for the joke. But there wasn't one. Then her gaze flicked back to the children. Realization flickered, the math, the resemblance, the small, impossible truth wrapped in their faces. "Those are yours," she said quietly. "Yes," Marlene's voice cut through the hallway like a string snapping. "Nicole, where are the—" She entered the kitchen before Nicole could react, stopping short when she saw us. Her eyes fell on the photo in Nicole's hand, then narrowed. "What's that?" Nicole didn't speak. She just held it up. Marlene stepped closer, peering at the image like it might rearrange itself if she stared hard enough. I watched her face as she scanned it, first with confusion, then with that familiar, sharp-edged scrutiny she'd always reserved for things that didn't fit her version of the world. She squinted, leaned in, and then her eyes landed on Michael. I saw the recognition hit like a physical blow. Her hand reached out to steady herself against the counter. "You told me it was over," she said, voice a whisper sharp with accusation. I didn't flinch. "You told me he was beneath me. And so you hid them, all of them." Her voice rose with each word, low and dangerous. "You have children with him?" The room felt like it tilted for a second, like gravity had lost its grip. Nicole looked between us, unsure whether to step in or disappear. I took the photo from her hands gently and folded it once more, sliding it back into my purse. "I didn't hide them," I said, eyes on Marlene. "I protected them." She didn't speak, didn't blink, just stood there with her hands trembling slightly on the edge of the counter. And in that silence, something shifted. I no longer felt small. I wasn't the girl begging to be understood, to be accepted, to be allowed to love who I loved. I was a mother, a wife, a woman who had built a life she didn't need anyone's permission to live. And even though the storm hadn't started yet, I could feel it coming. I didn't shrink away. I met Marlene's stare, and I didn't look down first. Have you ever shown someone a truth they weren't ready to see and watched them break under the weight of it? That moment in the kitchen was quiet, but it cracked something wide open. The photo had barely disappeared into my purse when Marlene's voice dropped into that dangerous, surgical tone she used when the real fury was still winding up inside her. "Start talking," she said. "All of it, from the beginning." Nicole stepped back slowly, as if the room had caught fire and she wasn't sure which side of it to run from. I stood still. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times, sometimes in the shower, sometimes staring at the ceiling in the dark, but never out loud. Never when her eyes were locked on me like this. "When did this start?" she demanded, her fingers digging into the back of a dining chair. "When did you decide to lie to this entire family?" "I didn't lie," I said evenly. "I just didn't invite you into something you would have tried to destroy." Marlene's eyes widened. "Destroy me? You left this family, Emily. You walked out and didn't look back. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" I laughed, not loudly. Just one of those broken, breathy laughs that slips out when the pain is too old to be dramatic. "What it did to you," I repeated. "You sat me down in that kitchen when I was 17 and told me the person I loved was trash. You told me he wasn't good enough for me, as if love was something you got to rank by income or education or whatever impossible checklist you carried around in your head." Marlene's mouth opened, then closed. But I was already moving forward, emotionally, if not physically. My words finally had momentum. "You said he was beneath me, and when I didn't agree, you made it clear I could either obey you or disappear. You're twisting things." "No," I said sharply. "I'm finally straightening them out." She looked startled, as if the tone in my voice didn't match the daughter she remembered. "That night," I continued, "I told you I was in love with Michael, and you looked me in the eye and said I was throwing my future away. You didn't ask if he made me happy. You didn't want to know what kind of person he was. You just wanted control. That's not fair. You didn't care what I felt. You just didn't want anyone to see your daughter with someone who didn't fit the Carter family mold. Someone whose father ran a repair shop instead of a law firm. Someone who couldn't be packaged for your holiday newsletter." She looked away, lips trembling, but still too proud to soften. "So I left," I said, "and it hurt like hell, but I left. Because the price of staying was becoming someone you approved of instead of someone I loved being." Marlene stepped forward then, her voice shaking. "You robbed us. You robbed this family of years we could have had, of children we didn't even know existed." "No," I said, firm now. "I spared them." That silenced her. I held her gaze as the weight of the words settled between us. "I protected my children from being measured, criticized, dismissed before they ever had a chance to speak. I protected Michael from walking into a home where he'd only be seen as an obstacle to my potential. And I protected myself because the girl you raised was never allowed to make her own choices unless they matched yours." Her chin lifted, just barely. "I only wanted the best for you." "No," I said. "You wanted your version of best, which didn't include my happiness or my husband or the 3 best things that have ever happened to me." The room was still. Nicole hadn't moved. No one had, and me. I wasn't shaking anymore. "I love my family," I said, voice low and steady. "And if you want to be part of our lives, you don't get to control the terms anymore. You don't get to criticize or guilt or manipulate." Marlene looked like she might argue, but then something cracked in her face. A flicker of something raw, something not used to being challenged. "I protected them from your judgment," I said one last time, "and I will protect them still." That's when she sank slowly into the nearest chair. Her hands trembled as they clutched the edge of the table, the full weight of what I'd said pressing down on her like time finally caught up. She didn't scream, didn't throw anything, but her silence was louder than any tantrum she could have unleashed. Have you ever said the one thing you were never supposed to say and felt your entire world hold its breath? That was me in that room. No longer a daughter begging to be heard, just a woman who'd finally drawn the line. I think the room was holding its breath. Marlene sat frozen, the photo still clenched in one hand, her knuckles pale against the smooth paper. Nicole had backed into a corner of the dining room, arms crossed tightly across her chest, like the air had suddenly turned too sharp to breathe. And me? I stood there with my heart pounding and my pulse screaming, but my voice steady. Finally, "I need you to understand this," I said, quieter now, but no less certain. "You do not get to meet your grandchildren until you respect me and the life I've built." Marlene flinched, as if I'd slapped her. "Emily," her voice broke around the edges. "They're my family, too." "No," I said, stepping forward. "Not yet. Not until you stop pretending you had no part in driving me away. Not until you own what happened in that kitchen all those years ago. Not until you can see Michael, and see the man who has held me up, raised our children with love, and stood beside me when no one else did, and not treat him like he's a stain on our name." Marlene opened her mouth to argue, to protest, to reach for some form of control. But then she stopped. Her hand slowly lowered to her lap, the photo still trembling between her fingers. Her shoulders slumped like something inside her had deflated. "I thought I was doing what mothers were supposed to do," she whispered. "I thought I was protecting you." "No, Mom," I replied gently. "You were protecting your pride." A beat passed, maybe two. Then she did something I'd never seen her do in my entire life. She cried, not dramatic, performative tears, not the silent, furious ones she shed behind closed doors. These were quiet sobs, shoulders shaking, lips pressed together, eyes shut like the weight of the years was finally too much to carry. "I thought you'd come back," she said through the tears. "I thought you'd realize I was right." I knelt beside her, not to comfort, but to be at eye level, to be seen. "I didn't need to realize you were right," I said. "I needed you to realize I wasn't wrong." Marlene looked up at me then, really looked, eyes red-rimmed, face stripped of the armor she'd worn all my life. "I want to change," she whispered, voice barely audible. A hush fell over the room like snowfall. Nicole's mouth parted. The clock in the hallway ticked a little too loudly. I swallowed hard. "You have no idea how long I waited to hear those words," I said. She nodded, desperate. "I don't know where to begin." "You begin," I said, "by proving it." And that was it. No hugs, no fanfare, no rush of forgiveness to wash away the years, just truth, finally spoken, boundaries clearly drawn, and a mother broken, vulnerable, trembling, holding onto a single photo of the life she was never invited to be part of. Not yet, but maybe one day. I stood and walked toward the coat rack. My bag was already packed. My heart wasn't light, but it wasn't heavy either. It was real, grounded. I turned at the door, looked back one more time. Nicole was still silent. Marlene was still weeping softly, the photo pressed to her chest like a prayer. And me? I walked out into the cold air, wind slicing across my cheeks, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running away. I was walking forward. And behind me, I left not a secret, but a truth that had finally been seen. Have you ever stood in your truth and watched the world shift around it? That was me, not erased, not invisible, just finally real. She showed up on a Sunday afternoon, 2 months to the day since that kitchen confrontation. No warning, no calls, just a soft knock on the door and the familiar sound of heels on concrete, less sharp than before, but still hers. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. Marlene stood there with her coat bundled tightly around her, wisps of silver at her temples, a canvas tote bag slung over one shoulder, and in her hands 3 small hand-knitted scarves. One pink, one purple, one navy blue. She didn't say anything right away. "Neither did I wasn't sure if I should come," she finally said, voice tight with nerves. "But I remembered you said to prove it, so I'm trying." I stepped aside. She entered slowly, her eyes scanning the hallway. The family photos now returned to their places, the tiny shoes piled by the door, the coat hooks overloaded with small jackets. It wasn't staged for her this time. It was lived in, honest, and it showed. Ava was the first to peek out from behind the couch, her twin braids swinging as she eyed the visitor curiously. Clara followed close behind, more cautious, clutching her sketchpad to her chest like a shield. Henry ran in with one sock on and peanut butter on his face. "Mom, who's that?" I glanced at Marlene, who stood frozen, her hands gripping the scarves like they might anchor her to the floor. "This is your grandmother," I said softly, eyes on the kids. "Her name is Marlene." The word hung in the air for a second. It didn't land like a fairy tale title. It was Grandma or Nana or any of those names we give to people we've loved since birth. It was a stranger's name, spoken gently with a lifetime of tension folded behind it. But the kids, bless their unfiltered little hearts, didn't treat it like a history lesson. Ava stepped forward. "Are those for us?" Marlene blinked, then nodded. "I made them myself. I didn't know your favorite colors, so I guessed." Clara took the purple one and wrapped it around her neck without hesitation. "It's soft." Henry grabbed the blue one and immediately turned it into a superhero cape, shouting, "Zoom," as he ran around the room. Marlene let out a breath I didn't think she realized she was holding. Ava, always the cautious observer, tilted her head. "Did you used to be my mommy's mom?" I held my breath. Marlene crouched down slowly, knees stiff but eyes soft. "I still am," she said. "I just made some mistakes." Ava studied her for a moment longer, then said, "It's okay. I make mistakes all the time." And just like that, the line loosened. Not vanished, not healed, but loosened. Marlene sat on the edge of the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't ask for stories. She didn't offer advice. She didn't press or pry. She just listened. She watched Clara draw a picture of a tall lady in a blue dress. She clapped politely when Henry showed her his Lego spaceship. She took small sips of tea and didn't comment on the mismatched mugs or the crumbs on the rug. It wasn't a performance this time. She was quiet, tentative, present. And for that afternoon, that small window of unfamiliar peace, I allowed it. Later, as I walked her to the door, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a photo of me at 17, sitting on the porch steps of our old house, laughing at something off camera. My hair was wild, my eyes were bright. "I found this in an old album," she said. "You looked free. I think that's what scared me the most." I didn't take the photo. I didn't need to. "I'm still that girl," I said, "just bigger now with more to lose," Marlene nodded, "and more to protect." We stood in the doorway for a long moment. Neither of us moved. "I'm not expecting forgiveness," she said finally. "Good," I replied, "because I'm not handing it out like candy, but I'm open." She smiled, small, sad, but real. And then she left, no promises, no grand gestures, just the beginning of a different tone.